Step into fall at the Bruce Company's Autumn Artisan Fair on Saturday, October 25th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Located at Bruce Company Garden Center at 2830 Parmenter Street in Middleton, the fair will have booths featuring 50 local makers and bakers offering unique handmade goods. We're talking about one-of-a-kind gifts like handcrafted woodwork and jewelry and delicious foods like homemade fudge. Find out more and check out the whole vendor list at brucecompany.com. Madison Magnet, Dane County's premier young professionals organization's annual fete is coming up. The Magnet Fete is a night of fun and philanthropy with other young professionals in the Madison area. And they've got an exciting development to celebrate. After 2 decades of bridging connection, they're merging with the Greater Madison Chamber of Commerce. Early bird tickets are on sale through November 7th. Tickets start at $50. And y'all, you do not want to miss this fun and fabulous night. Get your tickets today at madisonmagnet.org/magnetfet. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, it's Thursday, so of course it's time to dish on Madison's food and bar scene. Unfortunately, a well-known Madison restaurant has declared bankruptcy amid a class action lawsuit filed by a former server. Here with the story is Cap Times food and culture editor and friend of the show, Lindsay Christians. Lindsay, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello.
We're talking about a pretty serious story today. I know you and I typically have a lot of fun and a lot of joy and giggles, but we're going to have a little bit more of a serious tone because we got an important story. You recently released an article about Heritage Tavern, the high-end restaurant located right off the state capitol on East Mifflin Street. They filed for bankruptcy amid a lawsuit alleging wage theft. Can you give us the high-level overview of what's in this lawsuit, who filed it, and what are the accusations?
Yeah, sure. So the lawsuit was actually filed in December of last year by Florence Dieter. She was a server at Heritage for a little over a year. I believe it was like a June 2023 to October 2024. She basically alleges in the lawsuit that servers weren't being paid properly, that they weren't getting the tips that they were meant to get, that the tips were being distributed inaccurately, that there was basically some tip pooling and tip sharing that was wrong, that overtime was also being paid wrong. So she filed on behalf of herself and others similarly situated. So that's the class of the class action. But it is important to note that she is the only server named in the suit. I read in some parts of the lawsuit that it was maybe up to 50 people that she thought it should apply to. But of course, when Heritage Tavern's lawyers came back, they said, we don't acknowledge that a class like this even exists. So that whole thing is kind of in contention. But the idea was that she's alleging basically widespread wage theft at Heritage. And I think the important thing to note here is that she had enough receipts that a lawyer was willing to take this case. So whether you want to argue what actually is happening with it, which we can get into, but she was able to go to a lawyer and say, I have these receipts. I have this proof, and I'm going to come and I'm going to file this lawsuit. And then what ended up happening after that is in March of this year, Heritage Tavern filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, basically as a protective measure to protect its assets.
Wow.
Yeah. Alleged wage theft is pretty common across the industry, but what is not common is for a lawsuit like this to get this kind of traction. It's expensive to hire a lawyer. It takes a really long time to go through the legal system in this way. Things like this can take months, years. Bankruptcy certainly can take years. So I think what's unusual is to see this kind of legal action at that level, just because the burden is really on the plaintiff who is bringing that charge.
Lindsay, what is wage theft and what does it look like in the restaurant industry?
So wage theft on a really basic level just means that you were hired to do a job at a certain rate of pay, whether that is your hourly pay, your salary, your overtime, which is often time and a half, and then you were not paid that. So the minimum wage in the state of Wisconsin is $7.25 an hour, which is, can we just say that's insanely low?
Insanely low.
If you are a tipped server or bartender, you can be paid $2.33 an hour in the state of Wisconsin, which is what the server in this lawsuit was hired at. And then your tips make up the rest of your minimum wage. Now, I want to be clear. Most servers make more than $7.25 an hour, right? Especially in Madison.
With tips.
Yeah. So like most people aren't going to work at a high-end restaurant that's doing good business and make $7.25 an hour, right? So when wage theft happens is when you're working overtime and you're not getting that time and a half, which is one of the things that the lawsuit alleges. If you're getting less than minimum wage, if all of your hours worked add up to less than $7.25 an hour because more was taken out of your tips than should have been, your tips were distributed in other ways that they should not have been, or you're just not making enough in tips, like say it was a really slow week, your employer has to make up that difference to get you to minimum wage. So you see wage theft when you see managers who aren't supposed to be taking tips out of the tip pool. You see wage theft when you clock out and then you work another 30 minutes, right? That's really common in like high-end kitchens in particular. Like people will come in at like 11 in the morning, but their shift doesn't start until 3. All of those hours they are not paid for. That's wage theft. And that's something that happens all the time, right?
It really does. Like folks will be like, oh, well, we might need you. So why don't you just like wait on this side of the bar and like we'll call you in. And it's like, but that's their time.
Yep.
That is time that they're spending. You're not making money, so they're not making money, but that's still their time.
Right, exactly. If you have to be at a certain place at a certain time and your employer is telling you that you need to be in that place and time, but you're not going to get paid for that, that's a problem. So I think wage theft is really, really common and it can almost be invisible. Like there have been times where I didn't even notice that it was happening, but like in retrospect, I'm like, oh, I should have gotten those tips. I should have been tipped out. That should have been part of my wage legally, but it wasn't because oftentimes we're doing so many things. Work is part of all the things that we're doing in our lives and we're all trying to balance it all. But wage theft is incredibly common and the lowest paid workers are the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about Heritage Tavern and its place in the Madison food scene. Like, why does this story matter?
So Heritage Tavern opened in 2013 to so much fanfare. So that year, Dan Fox, who is the chef and owner, was on the cover of Madison magazine. He was the chef of the year. There was this very loving profile in the Isthmus, all about what it took to open the restaurant. He had been at the Madison Club where he was getting investors and getting known for his food. He had trained in Michelin star restaurants. So this was a really ambitious opening. It's right downtown. It's near the Bartell Theater, so it's pretty close to the Capitol. It opened and it was sort of flooded right away. They were doing late night. It was this really exciting place to go and to be. It got great reviews right out the gate. Dan Fox himself was a semifinalist for a James Beard Award for 3 consecutive years, 2015, 2016, and 2017. He really established a name for himself there at Heritage Tavern. And then alongside of the growth of the restaurant, he was also establishing these other businesses. So he had Fox Heritage Farms, where he was trying to breed a Wisconsin breed of pig. So he worked with farms to raise pigs, and he bought Willow Creek Farms, which does bacon. You probably have seen it around in local grocery stores. So he had that business, which is out in like Sauk Prairie area. And he also had Heritage Catering, which has been based out of Fitchburg. So the original post on Madison Foodie that sort of set all of this off with this story was about a catering event, which is actually not what the lawsuit is about. They're 2 separate businesses, but someone had heard at a catering event that, oh, this server isn't being given the tip that I'm tipping them. There's a different kind of structure. And they were saying, I want to let people know about this. So it kind of started as a rumor or something overheard. And that is kind of what kicked everything off. But to be clear, that's a separate business, and that's actually not even the business that was named in the lawsuit. That would be Heritage Tavern. So Heritage Tavern has a lot of fans. It's been downtown and really visible for 12 years, and Dan Fox is also very visible in the community. He does a lot of charity events, and a lot of people know him from that as well. He was also on a 4-episode series on Chopped, so he's been on food TV. He's had a lot of visibility as a chef, but also his business itself.
Thank you for setting up that context because it really is a big name in Madison and sort of, a high caliber restaurant.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And Lindsay, how did you first catch wind of the story?
I caught wind of the story from your very own CityCast producer, Haley Sperling, who worked in the industry. We've worked together on a story in the past. She mentioned to me, I think all the way back last December, that she'd heard some whisperings, because that's how some of this stuff comes out, right? Is this whisper network of people talking to each other. And so I started looking into it then, looked into it again in the spring. Again, like Haley said, I'm hearing things around, have you looked into this? Have you thought about this? And we did look. And I think one of the reasons I didn't see the lawsuits sooner than I did was because there were issues with our Pacer account. Pacer is the database of basically federal courts and bankruptcy court. So if you're looking up something that was filed in federal court, which this was, you would need to look there. You also need to know exactly the right name to search. And Heritage Tavern, its legal name is Fox and Bird LLC. So I didn't find it right away. I didn't find all this documentation right away. I think it's worth still writing the story now, even though they are apparently close to a settlement. That's what the sides have told me, that they can't comment on it because the litigation is ongoing, but they're close to a settlement. But it's still sort of worth writing about now because it is still ongoing, and this hadn't come out before now. And I think the primary reason it took me so long is just because I wasn't searching for the right thing. It's as simple as that.
It was embedded in systems and
basically, yeah.
covered by different names. And I can't help but think about that the systemic component of this, when you're talking about like how would this happen to just one person, like how it could possibly be impacting other folks, like if systems have changed. There's so many questions. Has Heritage responded to the suit and to your reporting?
So Heritage responded to my initial request. So Michelle Tejader, I'm probably saying her last name wrong, but she is working on some of the HR side of things for them. She is a former lawyer. She's retired. But she has basically said, the Chapter 11 was meant to protect Heritage. They filed it after the class action lawsuit because they wanted, again, to protect their assets. And I think what I was wanting to find out more about was, have your policies around how people are paid changed since this happened? Have you, made any internal changes? Have you made anything more transparent? And they did not respond to that. They said, this litigation's ongoing. We can't talk about that in specific. So, but that's something that I'm curious about, because sometimes with stories like this, just saying bad stuff happens, or, there's bad stuff alleged to have happened, I should say, that's one thing. But if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Well, so you said that they're currently in process of, potentially reaching a settlement. Does that kind of signal that there might not be more answers, like things will be closed and sealed up, so we just may never know the specifics?
Exactly right. Yep. So oftentimes after the two sides will reach a settlement, there'll be just rules and gag orders and things around that where we don't actually get any more information. So I don't anticipate a ton more. I don't know if it would be helpful for Heritage to say, yes, like we messed up in this way. I don't know that they would want to admit to anything, because they don't in the lawsuit. In the response, they're like, all this is wrong. We didn't fire her. All the things that she's saying are wrong, basically. So they maybe don't want to talk about that. But I think about these kinds of things because a lot of what's going to happen for Heritage in terms of how we relate to the restaurant as diners and people who go there, it's happening on social media. It's happening in the conversations that we have with each other at the yoga studio. It's happening in all these other places. And Heritage may need to do some damage control to say, this is what happened. Here's the things that we're doing now. We're making these different choices, and to really address it head on. I don't know, though, with the legal proceedings, if they want to say we screwed up, because maybe they're alleging that they didn't, right? That they did everything right. So I don't know. That to me is complicated. We've seen this kind of thing happen with Madison restaurants before, right? Where something happens online where people get really upset about it, and they're posting things on Yelp, and they're posting things on Google reviews, and they're posting things on wherever else you post to say, don't go to this place.
Right. And that's where the judge and the jury ends up being, is online.
Yeah, I had to do a lot this past week. I had to do a lot of just letting people be wrong on the internet sometimes.
It's so hard, but yeah.
Someone was saying, oh, yeah, there were a lot of other people named in this suit. And I was like, if there had been, I would have said that. There was just one person named in this suit. Or saying, oh, I wish I could have read this story, but it's behind a paywall. The Cap Times does not have a paywall. So there are things like that where I'm just sort of like, it's okay. People will have their conversations, and what I'm hoping to do with the story itself is just sort of shed light on this is what's going on. Things like this are fairly common. A lawsuit like this is not. And here's why it matters. Here's the context.
The rumor mill going around, I think also speaks to the fact that people care. I think rumors and gossip can be negative and it can also be really positive. If that was even what led to this story and just being like, hey, what did happen here? And I think that we have such an engaged community, right? Like people in Madison really care. They really care about their restaurants and want to feel good about spending their dollars at those locations. And so when I first saw this headline, I was like, another one? That was my first thought, was like, oh gosh, feels like we've been here before. And Lindsay, this is not the first time that you've reported on restaurant workers fighting back against their employers in court and in the press, and not the first time you've come on the show and talked about it. Just last fall, I spoke to you about the fallout at Rabinia Courtyard, which is a beloved place, over lost wages. And before that, you reported on allegations of harassment by the owner of the Botanist Social on State Street. And before that, you covered allegations of the extreme volatility from a former partner at the Rule Number One group. And now this, it's a lot. It's a lot. And these are extremely difficult situations for everyone involved. And it's such a connected city, But it does feel like the through line here is service workers actually being the ones to speak up. There might have been a time in the past where folks wouldn't even consider that as a possibility, So what do you think that is? Like, are tides changing? What are you thinking about around that?
I think tides definitely are changing. So the first time that I wrote about basically harassment in the industry was 2018. I did a story about Me Too coming to the restaurant industry. And I interviewed something like 17, 18 people, bartenders, servers, people who were still in the industry, people who had left, about their experiences. And in that particular case, it was something like 97, 98% of women who work in restaurants report being harassed at some point or other. Yeah. So it's so widespread. I think the difference with these most recent stories, we're talking more now about wage theft, about people not being paid. So I think the thing that I always need to be cautious about is that if you're going based on what someone is telling you happened to them at their workplace, I need receipts, just like the lawyer would. I need to see evidence of what you're claiming, because it gets us into very tricky legal situations, right? We need to make sure that what we are reporting is accurate and true to the very, very best of our knowledge. And we have to do all of that work, which is part of why you sort of release it to the discourse and you let people be having opinions and having ideas about what happened. But my side of it has to be fact checked within an inch of its life, right? When you have something like this lawsuit, I didn't need as much to go and talk to every possible server, because the other way that this kind of thing could have happened is if there wasn't a lawsuit filed and we're hearing about wage theft, well, then it's on me, the reporter, to say, how many people do I need to talk to prove that this is a pattern? What kind of evidence do they need to present me with so that I feel like we're reporting on something accurate and that it's backed up and clear and that we are establishing these patterns? I think seeing a lawsuit is a real significant thing, that it rose to the level of I'm going to file this in federal court and I'm going to go through all of these months of, stress and its financial challenges and all of these different things to say, I am owed this and this is what I'm alleging. So I think it's interesting too that they're going to settle. They'll settle out of court and we won't, as you said, know exactly what happened. But I think every time there's a story like this, if you're at your job and you're like, wow, my manager's taking my tips, or wow, I should have gotten paid time and a half for that overtime because I worked overtime over the weekend and that was beyond my regular hours, but I was only paid, time. That maybe there's a sense of more empowerment to speak up about it, because I think generally it's hard to get servers and people in the restaurant industry to want to talk to me, a reporter, to talk to a reporter, because what do they have to gain and what do they have to lose? And there seems to be more potentially to lose, because what can a story about what's happening do? But I think that we maybe are seeing what a story can do, which is start people talking about it, start people like saying, I should be paid what I was promised, instead of just being frustrated and complaining to your friends and maybe taking a different job, right?
Yeah.
Calling it out is, it's something we're seeing, I think, more and more. And I think it is something empowering.
Right. And that there's a pattern. Like, even if you don't know for sure what happened in this particular situation, there are other issues that have happened that we do know. It was indeed wage theft, and it was proven, and the receipts were there. And, just thinking back to my time when I was a server, I don't think I was clever enough to really be paying attention, frankly. And I was like 22 years old. And I mean, that's probably no for everyone. Some of you are already out there. Check your pay stubs, but really keep receipts. And if something, I appreciate that point. Like, if something isn't stacking up, it might not be you. Like, you might actually have to consider that something might be going wrong, and it might not be intentional. Like, all of this is like really important, but it is hard out here in these streets, and service industry workers are working hard for that money. I'm just thinking about how I don't know if it's that our scene is so unique, but it really does feel very embedded and connected. I wonder if there's any sense that it's either that makes it harder or easier for service workers in Madison to come forward with complaints. There's the Madison Foodie Facebook group who has around like 90,000 people. Like, there's a lot of people that talk online in Madison. Rumors and gossip can run rampant. And sometimes there are truths that are in it. How are you thinking about navigating this space? Or do you have any advice for the good people of Madison, as consumers and patrons and customers when it comes to responding to these allegations?
I think what I want people to take away is that many things can be true. A restaurant can be wonderful and important to you and can maybe have challenges with transparency with how it pays its people. I think it is tempting sometimes to want to say all of these people are bad or all of these people are good. I really hope that what comes out of this is that Heritage has maybe more transparency around how it pays folks. Not assuming that they did anything wrong, because of course the lawsuit did not prove that, and being cautious about assuming that. But I also hope that this sparks more conversations among people to think about, like, if you have a favorite place that you go, talk to the staff, talk to the people who are serving you, ask them about their working conditions, respect their work. I think that because some restaurant work can be kind of transitional or it's done by younger folks, that we can kind of brush it aside or minimize it. But work is work. And something about wages that I believe in my heart is that if the job is the same, the wage should be the same. And we should have respect for these jobs, and we should ask for clarity and for good treatment of the people who serve us in restaurants.
From your, point of view with the power of the pen, does reporting and, lawsuits like this have legs when it comes to impact? We talked about Rule Number 1 group, talking about Merchant and Lucille, Botanist Social, and Rabinia Courtyard. With the exception of Rabinia Courtyard, these businesses are all still up and running. People can walk through their doors today. Do you think that your story and like this lawsuit will have a big impact?
I mean, if the question is, will Heritage shut down? I don't know. I think if you have a story like this come out and then people are coming to work for you, you have to maybe do some extra work to be like, you probably read that story, or you probably just understand, like, this is where we were. These are the things that we're doing now to make sure that you will get paid X, Y, Z, whatever. These are the forms that we now have. These are the policies and procedures that we've changed. So sometimes I think those changes are not visible to us. Sometimes I think that bad actors continue to be bad actors, right? Sometimes I think that the impact that we see is more within somebody read that story and they felt like they could speak up about what was happening to them. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm not going to eat there anymore. I mean, that's a choice too that people can make. I don't know. I do think that these conversations are important. I try not to get too caught up in like if I write this, what will happen? Or like write something with the idea that I want something to happen, right? Unless I'm reviewing a theater show and it's really good and I want you to go. Like, then I have a goal, right? You know? So, but something like this, I really try to take a step back from like what's going to happen with regard to this. My wonderful colleague Danielle just wrote about
Danielle Duclos?
Yeah, just wrote about some things happening on the state level regarding sexual abuse of students and the protection of teachers and how those things are reported. And new legislation has just been proposed, like related to her story. That's fantastic, right? I don't know what will happen with that legislation. We don't know. But there are things that can happen based on our reporting and the stories that we tell. And some of them we see and some of them we don't. But I still think that these stories are important to tell. And that the more that we talk about power imbalances, the more we talk about how the restaurant culture is changing, because it is changing. Restaurants used to be very different kinds of places to work. Some of them, not all of them, right? But they were different places to work. And the workforce that's coming up now may have different standards, different ideas about what kind of work they want to do, what kind of work they're willing to stay for, what kind of treatment that they'll stand for. And those are all conversations that managers of different generations need to have, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So not to make it a generational necessarily, but I do think that the culture of restaurants is changing, and stories like this reflect some of that change.
Lindsay, as we wrap up this conversation, can you share what are the next steps in this lawsuit?
So right now, my understanding based on the documents is that a settlement has essentially been agreed on by both sides in the class action lawsuit specifically. And it sounds like the bankruptcy case is also wrapping up, and that that's going to wrap up too, that we're sort of reaching the end of both of them. But I do kind of want to follow how Heritage responds to this publicly, if at all. Similar thing with Florence Dieter, who filed the lawsuit. I don't know if she will want to talk further. She may not be able to after the settlement, right? So it may be that Heritage has some work to do to rehabilitate its image among those who feel that it's been tarnished. It may be that Dan will make some other decisions about how he wants to engage. He's pretty visible with, charitable events and things like that. He'll definitely be running into people who will have seen this and who may have questions. And that's hard. I think all of it's really hard. And I think hopefully we'll see servers, other people who are in these kinds of jobs, understanding that we as readers take these things seriously too, that we care about workers being treated well in any situation, this one or others, but in any situation.
And for now, there are no plans for it to close. So everything's up and running as it was. Yeah. So that is a lot of reporting, Miss Lindsay Christians.
Yeah.
And a really serious story, and really appreciate the care and thoughtfulness that you put forward with it and for bringing it to the show. As always, you're quite a gift.
Thank you. I appreciate that. These kinds of stories are always complicated and tough. And so I want to be really careful with how I approach them and fair as much as possible to everybody involved.
Well, Lindsay, thank you for coming on CityCast Madison and making the time and for putting out the story. We will for sure link to your story in our show notes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's Lindsay Christians, food and culture editor at the Cap Times. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you valued the show, why not share this episode with someone who goes out frequently in the Madison food scene? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care and thanks for listening.